Into the Breach is a bug-killing isometric roguelike by the guys who brought you FTL. For anyone who hasn't played a roguelike before, it's kinda just like real life. When you die, it's permanent. Now, coming into this game, I have to admit that I'm not a big fan of roguelikes as a concept. Don't get me wrong, I can totally understand why the high-stakes nature and purity of starting over from scratch after every death can appeal to somebody. It's just that I'm the kind of guy who wants to feel like they're making gradual progress. Every time I play an RPG, I immediately want to get the best armor and best stats. I mean, it just fills the void in my life where compassion and empathy usually lies. I hate to say it, but tangible progress and the feeling that I'm making headway is something that I look for in almost any game that I play. I'm like one of those rats who dies because they keep stimulating the pleasure center of their brain instead of eating food. So with that in mind, it should be all the more impressive that Into the Breach was able to draw me in so easily, despite forcing me to restart each time without having any of my progress carry over. This is in part thanks to the other ways that the game incentivizes multiple playthroughs and playstyles. Unlike most roguelikes where you have to start each game 100% fresh, Into the Breach allows you to actually earn different pilots and mechs that can be used in subsequent playthroughs. The game also goes as far as letting you keep one pilot at the end of each run. Now, normally this would be sacrilegious for any roguelike, but it's couched within the time travel mechanic of the game, and we all know if it's time travel it's not cheating, which is why Back to the Future is PG despite clearly having incest on display. Speaking of time travel, the game centers around 3 mechs going back in time to save the world before it can be destroyed by the kaiju-esque Vec. The game opens up with the title card in a ruined city. It kind of reminds me of the opening of Terminator, which is already a really great sign. The story of the game is pretty straightforward though, and told exclusively through on-screen text. In short, humanity is on the brink of extinction as a huge bug-like species called the Vec have wiped out all but a few remaining cities. As such, it's up to you and your 3 electric boogaloos to save as many of the remaining humans as possible. Narratively speaking, this is all pretty skeletal, and it just serves as an excuse to get you into mechs that punch bugs, but there's some clever ways that the game fleshes out its game world. So whether it's the different attitudes of the CEOs and the different islands in the game, or the quippy banter that pops up pretty frequently, you start to get attached to a bunch of pixels on the screen, just like one of those weirdos with their waifu pillows. Now, I've talked enough about the background surrounding the game, so let's start by talking about punching bugs into oblivion.
Stop right there, criminal scum!
No, not that oblivion, this one. You start by selecting your difficulty and squad at the main menu. When you first start out, you really don't have very many decisions to make since you'll only have access to the starter squad. They're referred to as the Rift Walkers and they're the most straightforward of the bunch, but we'll get more into that later. All you really need to know at this point is that each mech in the squad usually serves a unique purpose. Whether it's dealing damage or displacing units, they all have their part to play. From here you have 4 islands to choose from. It's worth noting that the difficulty of each island actually comes from the terrain rather than the usual escalating difficulty that you'll see in most games. This isn't going to be that usual challenge tower bullshit like in Mortal Kombat. This means that you can select any island in any order that you want from the start. You technically don't even need to clear all islands in order to reach the final mission either. See you at AGDQ, losers! Even better, the last island actually scales with your current progress too, so if you choose to shortcut your way to the last mission, you're not really punished for it with higher leveled enemies. You'll usually want to pick your starting island based on your current squad and the terrain that they're best suited for. For example, if your squad's melee heavy, you'll likely want to start on the desert island because their attacks don't have the issue of contending with the sandstorms that usually block a unit's projectiles. To better explain what I mean, let's talk about the actual gameplay. You begin each map by placing your mechs on an 8x8 grid, and there's a bit of logic to where you want to place certain mechs. For example, you'll usually want to place your artillery mech in the back since they're lower on health. The distance also allows them to safely shoot from afar, just like the JFK assassination. No, it can't be. One thing that every new player of Into the Breach needs to learn the hard way is that the win condition is to survive, not just to kill all the bugs. At easier difficulties, you'll have no problem mopping up scores of enemy spawns, but if you play on normal or harder difficulties, you'll quickly realize that you'll need to be willing to sacrifice mechs, pilots, or even cities just to make it out alive. There are really only 2 ways that you can lose the game. First, you lose all of your mechs. Second, you lose too much power. You lose power when the Vec attack a city, and some cities will actually have more electricity than others, so you'll want to prioritize accordingly. I'm sorry, Jimmy, you only have 1 power and I'm off the clock, and retired, and I'm not even a cop anymore. If you die or lose too much power, only one of your pilot is going to be able to make it back into the breach. So I've talked a lot about how you can lose, but we already do that enough just by being alive. Anyways, it's time to talk about winning. Like I said, you win each map by making it until the last turn. During these turns, you'll also need to manage different objectives like collecting time pods, defending key structures, or simply not taking damage. Sounds pretty easy on paper, right? Well, it's not. Like that pain in your neck that you worry might be a tumor, the Vec will do everything in their power just to ruin your day. They'll split your attention between your mechs and your cities, and there's moments where your attention will honestly feel really stretched. This further emphasizes that the difference between a good move and a great move is dependent on how much you can actually accomplish with your limited resources. For example, a good move might be to kill one Vec, but a great move would be to stop a Vec from attacking your city while simultaneously moving them in front of an enemy spawn, killing them in the process. When you pull these multidimensional moves off, it really feels like you've just solved a Rubik's Cube, only in this case, the Rubik's Cube is actually trying to kill you. Of course, to accomplish any of this, you'll need to make proper use of your mech's abilities. In the interest of not spoiling the fun of all the new mechs, I'll just cover the abilities of the starter squad. We've already talked about the Riftwalkers, so let's begin here. Their artillery mech, as we mentioned before, has long-range attacks with low health, and is crucial when it comes to displacing enemy units. This is a good time to mention that one of the best ways to get rid of bugs is to dump them into the ocean. It's kind of funny, that's actually how I solve most of my life's problems too. The main damage dealer for the Riftwalkers is the combat mech. He solves most of his problems through his fists. He can knock enemies into one another, dealing more damage, or move them into enemy spawns. Or he can just dump bugs into the ocean too. Last is the brute tank. He shoots a shell that does decent damage and moves units. The brute tank is pretty boring and isn't much fun at parties. An interesting thing to note about the Riftwalkers is that they're actually one of the weaker squads in the game. I think the developers did this so that players didn't get a big dick and feel like they could nuke all the bugs like they were in Starship Troopers. Why did you bring a camera out here? There's bugs, you fucking moron. I've only mentioned one squad of several, so if these abilities don't interest you, know that there's a ton more. Whether it's judo chopping or flamethrowing, there's really a mech and squad for everyone. It's worth noting that you don't need to choose mechs from the same squad, and you're free to mix and match where you see fit. Although choosing all the same mech is sort of like eating a chocolate Nutella sandwich. The ingredients don't really make a complementary product. From a visual standpoint, you'll likely notice that the game and its UI is incredibly stark. There's not a lot of superfluous details here, and it's for the betterment of the game. Things like mechs, enemies, and environmental tiles are simple and easy to understand, but that just means that you don't have to waste your time hovering over every unit of the map to know what they do. The visual language here is strong, like a man flipping you off in traffic, you know what it all means right away. If you're someone who only plays games for the graphics, go play the latest Forza with your racing wheel, you dumb turd. This game's all about its gameplay, and that's the way life should be. Stop caring only about aesthetics, or you'll end up as the latest pathetic loser on 90 Day Fiancé.
Give me it, bitch! Give me, I don't have it, you did!
Alright, so what else? Well, apart from the visual presentation, the score is done by returning composer Ben Prunty. He further cements his prowess by making a better score than every milquetoast Marvel soundtrack out there for the past 10 years. It's difficult to score a strategy game. On one hand, you don't want to have a thumping rave soundtrack that makes it impossible for the player to hear themselves think. On the other hand, you don't want it to be so bland that it's basically a Marvel soundtrack. Thankfully, what we get in Into the Breach's score is the right blend of melancholy to complement the source material. I mean, we're talking about the genocide of the human race here. All in all, the game is incredibly satisfying to play with just the right amount of progression and challenge to appeal to people that would normally dump a challenging game into the ocean. Why can't I stop? If you're someone who likes roguelikes, Into the Breach will present a challenge, and if you don't like roguelikes, hopefully this review made it look interesting enough to give it a chance. Thankfully, this game is on Steam, so if you want to play it for a bit and it's not your thing, refund that shit, it is an Origin after all.